They say the wind in the Wyoming High Basin doesn't just blow, it whispers. It reminds a man of every mistake he's ever made, every name he's forgotten, and every person he couldn't save. Silas Vance knew that wind better than he knew the sound of his own voice. He hadn't spoken to a human soul in 3 winters. His only company was a half-blind blue heeler named Bo and the heavy, rusted weight of a badge he'd thrown into the bottom of a cedar chest 20 years ago. Silas lived in a cabin that seemed to grow right out of granite. It was small, sturdy, and smelled of old tobacco and dried pine. He liked the quiet. Quiet meant no one was asking for justice. Quiet meant no one was dying on his watch. But that Tuesday, the quiet broke. The first sign was Bo. The old dog didn't bark. He let out a low, mournful whine that started in his chest and ended in shiver. Silas looked up from the harness. He was mending. He reached for the Winchester, leaning against the fieldstone fireplace. Out here, a visitor was either a mistake or a death sentence. He stepped onto the porch. The air was so cold it felt like breathing crushed glass. And there at the edge of the tree line was a shadow. It stumbled. It fell. It rose again, dragging one leg like a broken wing. As the figure got closer, Silas saw the flashes of white, a thin linen dress, shredded by briars, stained with something dark and wet. It was a woman. Her hair was a tangled nest of raven black, matted with frozen mud. She didn't call out. She looked at the rifle in his hand. Her eyes were bloodshot, swimming in a fever that should have killed a grown man hours ago. Her lips moved, cracked and bleeding. "Kill me," she whispered. The sound was like dry leaves scraping on a grave. "Please, Silas, kill me now before I turn." Silas froze. He didn't know her name, but she knew his. That was the first alarm bell. The second was the word turn. In these hills, folks talk about the black tongue, a sickness that came from the deep silver mines, a fever that turned a person's blood to ink and their mind to madness. He aimed the Winchester. His finger tightened on the trigger. He'd seen the black tongue once in a camp near Cheyenne. It wasn't a death. It was a transformation into something that didn't know its own mother. "Stay back," Silas growled, his voice like grinding stones. "Do it," she begged. She fell forward, her hands clutching at his boots. Her fingers were ice. "I can feel it behind my eyes. It's taking the light. Don't let me become one of them." She slumped over, exposed in the back of her neck. Silas looked down, his thumb on the hammer, ready to end the misery he saw before him. But then the wind shifted her hair, and Silas Vance dropped to his knees. The rifle clattered to the porch boards, forgotten. There, hanging from a thin, tarnished silver chain around her neck, was a locket. It was a small, heart-shaped thing, dented and scratched. Silas reached out with a trembling hand and flipped it open. Inside was a tintype photograph of a woman with the same high cheekbones and a man in a Union uniform. Silas, 30 years younger. "Clara," he breathed. It was his daughter. The daughter he'd been told died in the orphanage fire while he was away at war. The daughter whose name he'd carved into a symbolic headstone behind the barn. If you're sitting there wondering how a man deals with a ghost holding a death sentence, you're not alone. We're about to go deeper into the shadows of the High Basin. But before we find out if Silas can say what he already lost once, do me a favor. Take a sip of your coffee, settle in, and hit that subscribe button. Out here in the West, the stories only get darker before the dawn, and you won't want to miss the next chapter. He laid her on his own bed. The gray veins were spreading, reaching toward her jawline. He'd heard the stories from the old miners. The black tongue wasn't just a sickness. It was a poison, usually delivered by the cleaners, men hired by the mining syndicates to get rid of anyone who saw too much. It was a slow-acting venom that made the victim look like a monster, so no one would dare help them. He built the fire until the stove glowed cherry red. He boiled water. He searched his old medical kit, the one he hadn't opened since he stopped being a lawman. "You're not turning, Clara," he muttered, though he wasn't sure he was talking to her or to God. "It's just a fever. It's just the world trying to be cruel." For 3 days, the cabin became a battlefield. Clara screamed in her sleep, thrashing against the blankets, clawing at her own skin as if she were trying to peel the gray away. Silas stayed beside her. He bathed her forehead with cool water. He forced bitter willow bark tea down her throat. He didn't sleep. He watched the door with his pistol in his lap, waiting for the men who had done this to her. Because a girl like Clara didn't get poisoned by accident. On the fourth night, the fever broke. The violet veins began to fade, retreating back into her skin like shadows at noon. She opened her eyes. They weren't bloodshot anymore. They were a clear, piercing blue, the same color as the Wyoming sky after storm. "Pa!" she whispered. Silas choked back a sob. He took her hand. It was warm. "I'm here, Clara. I'm right here." She told him the story then. She hadn't died in the fire. She'd been taken, sold to a work camp in the silver mines. She'd spent her life underground until she found out who her father really was, a legendary lawman the syndicate feared. She had stolen a ledger, a record of every murder, and every stolen acre of land the syndicate owned. They had poisoned her and let her run, knowing the Black Tongue would kill her before she reached safety. They didn't count on Silas Vance living in the one place they couldn't find. But the syndicate had scouts, and silence doesn't last forever in the High Basin. On the seventh day, the wind stopped. The woods went deathly still. Not even the crows made a sound. Silas stood at the window, watching the ridge road. 3 riders appeared. They weren't wearing masks. Men who don't wear masks don't intend to. Silas walked to the bed. Clara was sitting up, her face still pale, but her eyes sharp. He handed her his backup coat. "Stay under the floorboards, Clara, just like we practiced." "I'm not hiding anymore, Pa," she said, her voice steady. Silas looked at her. He saw the iron in her. He nodded once. "Then keep your head low." Silas stepped out onto the porch. He didn't take the Winchester this time. He took 2 ivory-handled revolvers, tools of a trade. He thought he'd retired. He stood there, an old man in a worn coat, looking like nothing more than a lonely rancher. Thorne pulled up his horse 20 yards out. He smirked. "Vance, we heard you were dead. Or worse, Pius." "I was both for a while," Silas said, "until you brought your trash to my doorstep. Give us the girl and the ledger. Silas, you're too old for this dance. Your hands are shaking." Silas looked at his hands. They were steady as the mountain. "My hands are fine, Elias. It's my patience that's gone thin. We're at the edge of the cliff now, folks. The air is thick with the smell of horse sweat and impending lead. Does an old lawman have one more fight left in him? Or is the basin about to claim 2 more souls? Before the first shot is fired, make sure you like this video. It helps our stories reach more people who love the old ways. And tell me, if you were Silas, would you have opened that door? Now, let's get back to the gunsmoke." Thorne didn't wait. He was fast, but he was arrogant. He reached for his holster with a flourish. Silas didn't flourish. He just moved. The sound of the first shot echoed off the granite cliffs like a thunderclap. Thorne's had spun off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. It was a warning. The next 2 shots weren't. The rider to Thorne's left tumbled backward out of his saddle before his gun was even clear. The rider to the right managed to fire once, the bullet splintering the porch railing an inch from Silas's hip. Silas didn't flinch. He adjusted his aim and fired. The man dropped. Thorne, his horse, spooked and rearing. Thorne's shoulder erupted in a spray of red. He fell from his horse, hitting the dirt hard. He looked up, gasping, to see Clara standing in the doorway, the smoking colt in her hand. Her face was grim, her eyes cold. Silas walked down the steps. He stood over Thorne, the barrels of his revolvers still smoking. "The Black Tongue didn't take her, Elias," Silas said quietly. "But the ledger is going to take you." Thorne looked at the old lawman, and for the first time, he saw the man who had cleared the territory 30 years ago. He saw the ghost of the basin. "Please," Thorne wheezed. Silas didn't pull the trigger. He didn't have to. He just reached down and took the man's gun. "Get off my land. Tell your masters that Silas Vance is back, and tell them I'm coming for the rest of the ink." The riders didn't come back that month, or the next. The ledger was sent to a judge in Denver by way of a trusted friend. The syndicate began to crumble. arrests, suicides, and scandals that filled the papers for a year. But in the High Basin, the papers didn't matter much. Spring came early that year. The snow melted into the creeks, and the first wildflowers, the ones they call Indian paintbrush, started to bleed red across the meadows. Silas and Clara sat on the porch. The gray veins were a memory. Though Clara still had a small scar on her neck where the fever had been strongest, she was whittling a piece of cedar, her hands sure and steady. "You ever think about going back, Pa?" she asked. "To the city? To a life with people?" Silas looked out at the mountains. He looked at Bo, who was sleeping in a patch of sun. He looked at his daughter, the girl he'd found at the end of a rifle barrel. "I think people are overrated, Clara," he said, "except for the ones who know how to find their way home." Clara smiled. It was a small thing, but it was real. Maybe the lesson is this. We all have a turn inside us. We all have a darkness that tries to take the light when the West is a big place. It's easy to get lost. But as long as there's a light in a window and a man with a steady hand, no one is ever truly gone. Thanks for riding with us through the High Basin today. This story reminded me that the things we lose have a funny way of finding us when we're ready to see them. If Silas and Clara's journey touched you, tap that like button and leave a comment below. What was the most powerful moment for you? We read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe so you're the first to hear our next tale from the frontier. Until next time, keep your fire lit and your back to the wind. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in the next one.